Gaza is a graveyard for children within an open-air concentration camp. That is how I would describe it. And I think UNICEF is fully correct in saying this is a war on children.
Dr Omar Abdel-Mannan, it's a desperate day, really, isn't it? That you've had this week of hope and now bloodshed again. Your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Kathy, for having me on the programme, first of all. So, absolutely. To be frank, I was not very hopeful that this ceasefire was going to last beyond. I was surprised it lasted a week. I felt that based on previous precedents we've seen in these escalations, that at some point it would break down. So the question was when, not if. And I think there is also something to be said about this terminology, because I do not see this having been a ceasefire. I see this as a humanitarian pause. That during that period, we had doctors being killed. We also had doctors being abducted and captured, illegally detained. There are at least 14 of whom are currently under captivity with the Israeli Defense Force that have been named through colleagues, through my contacts on the ground. And we don't know anything about them. And these are doctors that were taking patients outside from north to the south, escorting them as they would transporting any sick patients. And they were captured on that journey, which is a treacherous journey that has become the road of death, essentially, in Gaza.
Well, what do you say to Israeli claims that, these were people who were affiliated to Hamas, they were working for Hamas, as well as obviously being medics?
So I've asked that question to all my colleagues, and I know a number of them, two of them at least, very well. I've worked with them when I've been there teaching and training junior doctors, and I've never heard anything in terms of their political affiliation. These are people who are purely medics, humanitarians. Medics tend to stay away from the politics within Gaza. They don't like to associate themselves with Hamas or with any other political faction because it can sully their sort of reputation, and they actually are there to look after human beings.
What have your contacts out there been able to use the truce to sort of rebuild, patch up the medical facilities? What is the situation now?
I would say rebuilding and repatching would be a fanciful term right now. I think the reality is that they are working under horrific pressures. If anything, the situation has got worse in a sense that the excess mortality and the deaths, the wave of deaths that was coming, that I've been talking about for weeks, because when you destroy healthcare infrastructure and public health systems, you do not only cause direct injuries and death and amputated limbs, but you also cause the risk of cholera, the risk of infectious diseases, the risk of, malnutrition, which we are seeing the effects of. So they are actually now now they're dealing with bombs again, but in the last week, they've been dealing with unwell children that were, frankly, suffering from things that we saw on the television in the 90s in Somalia. I remember these pictures very vividly. The pictures where we would donate to Somalia because these children were dying of famine. This is, I think, what we are seeing now in Gaza in 2023 of all times.
Well, and your specialism is in paediatrics. Yeah. This has been described by UNICEF today as a war on children. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it was a graveyard. I think Gaza is a graveyard for children within an open-air concentration camp. That is how I would describe it. And I think UNICEF is fully correct in saying this is a war on children. By definition, Gaza has the highest, proportion of children in a country, in the world. Half of the people are under the age of 18, so they're disproportionately affected. I saw pictures and videos last night which disturbed me greatly as a pediatrician and as a father, frankly, in seeing these babies, these premature children and patients on intensive care beds who were found at our Nasser Pediatric Hospital rotting. The corpses had been rotting. There were 5 of them that were abandoned. And they were not, the accusation from the Israelis was that the IRC had told the doctors to evacuate and leave them behind. These doctors, from, again, connections and contacts on the ground, were forced at gunpoint to leave, make a choice, be shot or leave these children. And they were left to die by themselves.
You used the phrase an open-air concentration camp. I mean, a lot of people, particularly Jewish listeners, may find that quite offensive. What's your response to that?
I am not saying that to be provocative. The reason I say that is people say it's an open-air prison. A prison is where people are imprisoned for having done something wrong. A concentration camp, by definition, is where people are hoarded together and kept isolated from the world in a set space because of the atrocities. Because of blockade. And this is what is happening in Gaza. That is why I'm using that terminology. I'm not trying to be provocative. I have friends, some of my colleagues who are pediatricians have family that are being held hostage in Gaza. And I wholly deplore the actions of Hamas on the 7th of October. I also wholly hold Hamas responsible. In addition to the Israeli Defense Force, they also have blood on their hands because they have allowed their population to be bombed at will. But that does not excuse the Israeli Defense Force and the Israeli government from continuing to rain down hellfire on children, women, and men in Gaza.
Just finally, you're holding these weekly vigils in Whitehall. What do you want to achieve with that? I know you've been to Gaza yourself and you've trained medics there, as you say, but why are you doing the vigils and what do you hope to get out of it?
So the Vigils is actually started on 14th of November in response to the fact that we were not allowed to hold a fundraising event at the Royal College of Physicians on the 15th. So we decided to bring our speakers who had flown in from all over the world and let them speak. And we stood outside Downing Street, a large group of us, 300 or 400 medics and nurses, and we are united to call for an urgent ceasefire. We have been doing these vigils every week since. Tonight, in 2 hours' time, we'll be doing the same across 12 UK cities, across 12 international cities, ranging from Toronto to South Africa to Sydney to Ramallah in the West Bank. And this is a message from the healthcare profession and the healthcare workers that we will not accept the continual systematic targeting of doctors, nurses, hospitals in this war, and that needs to stop. And the only way to do that is to have a lasting and permanent ceasefire and to allow for humanitarian aid to enter and to find a lasting solution for this, because these atrocities that have happened on both sides should not be happening in 2023, and we need to teach our children some humanity. And if we are going to teach them humanity, then we need to look in the mirror first.